Okay, welcome to lecture 2 for topic 9. And in this lecture, we're going to be talking about agents of political socialization. Okay, so political socialization takes place through agents of socialization. And as I mentioned on the last lecture, that the agents of that political socialization are institutions and groups that help shape an individual's basic political values and beliefs. Because again, you're not born with those values and beliefs. You learn those through these agents of socialization. Your textbook talks about many different agents of socialization, and let me just put these up here all at the same time, and we'll talk about them. So your textbook talks about how families are agents of socialization, social networks, education, membership in social groups, such as race and gender and religion, your party affiliation, economic class, and the experiences that you might have had politically. In this lecture, we're going to talk about family, social networks, and memberships in social groups. And I'll leave it to you to read about the other agents of socialization in the textbook. Now, as you're learning about these different agents of political socialization that we're going to talk about in lecture and you're going to read about in your textbook, I want you to keep in mind that the extra credit opportunity you have for this week. And the extra credit opportunity is a writing assignment. And in the writing assignment, what I want you to do, and it's just a brief writing assignment, what I want you to do is I want you to identify 2 agents of political socialization that have been most significant in shaping your political beliefs or values. And so, for example, a lot of people think, and we're going to be talking about this in a moment, that their family, their mom or their dad, grandma or grandpa, brother or sister, have had a tremendous impact on what they believe politically and what, and what their values are politically. And so, that's a good example of an agent of political socialization. It could very well be your educational experience. It could be your membership in a social group, okay? Your religion, it's a membership in a social group. So for this assignment, I want you to pick 2 different agents of political socialization. So you can't pick your mom and your dad because those both are the family agent of socialization. But you could pick your mom and your educational experience, or you could pick your religion and the fact that you're African American. I mean, whatever it may be. So pick 2 agents of political socialization, and then for each of those agents, I want you to describe how this agent shaped your political beliefs or values. You submit this writing assignment to the assignment box. And if you submit it by the due date, you can earn up to 10 extra credit points. I also wanted to say that if you feel free telling me specifically how the agent shapes your political beliefs and values and give concrete examples, feel free to do that. But if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can sort of explain to me in general how they've impacted your political values and beliefs. But if you don't feel comfortable giving me specific examples, that's okay. Don't worry though. I don't grade you on what your political values and beliefs are. I don't really care whether you're a conservative or a liberal. I don't care whether you support this candidate or that candidate. I really, I care. I want you to have those values, but I don't judge you based on the values or the beliefs or your opinions, your political opinions. So keep that in mind. So feel free to share how you feel because what your issues and values are specifically, because you will not be downgraded for that in this class. You never would be. All right, let's go on and take a look at the different specific agents of political socialization. All right, so let's talk about the family and how the family acts as an agent of political socialization. You can just sort of think about your own relationship with your family and what political messages you receive from your family growing up, and even as you're a young adult or an older adult, the kinds of political messages that you get from your family. And so the political messages received from our families can greatly shape our attitudes and our values if those messages are consistent and that there's a coherent message that is being communicated to the people within the family, in particular to the children. And so one of the things from my growing up, what I noticed is that when it came to politics, my parents really sort of served as role models for me. We talked about politics around the dinner table a lot. It was not a verboten or forbidden subject. In fact, there was an expectation that when we were eating dinner and if a political subject came up, there would be an expectation that you would be, as you got older, someone informed on that political subject. That if you had an opinion, you sort of need to, base your opinions on facts. There was also that it had to be a civil conversation, right? We were allowed to discuss, but we weren't going to get in fights over it. And I really felt like that set me up as a message, a political message that my parents were communicating to me. The politics was important. It's something you should be informed about, but that it's something that you talk about civilly. My parents voted all the time, right? And they would take me to go vote with them, and I took my kid to go vote with me, right? And so, parents serve as role models in terms of communicating attitudes about government, that politics is something you should talk about, or you could be communicated that politics is not something you should talk about. If you can get the message that voting is important and that government's important, or you get a message from your family that says, you know what, your voice doesn't matter. It's, that these folks are crooked and they don't listen to, what the people really want. But both of those are examples of political socialization. Another role that families play, families serve as role models for attitudes towards, government in terms of can shape your political behavior. Families also shape what your ideology, whether you're conservative or liberal or something else. They can shape party affiliation, so that as you see your parents being affiliated with one, like the Democrats or the Republicans, that's going to shape, that what you hear in terms of support for one party and maybe criticism of another party. Religion comes with values, and oftentimes those values are important social values that got reflected in government policy. And so oftentimes there's a relationship between what your religious beliefs are and what kind of public policy that you'll support. And families obviously, they transmit their values to you broadly, whether it's, and that includes political values as well. You could think about how your families have shaped your ideology. And, for the most part, if your parents are conservatives, you're more likely to be conservative. If your parents were, are Democrats, you're more likely to be a Democrat, but not always. If your parents are politically inactive, then it's likely that you might be politically inactive and stay out of politics. But that's not always the case. I mean, there's a lot of other agents of socialization that we're going to be talking about, in particular, the social networks that you belong to and the impact of your friend and peers. But also, recent research is showing that people who grow up, sorry about my cat in the background, I guess it's getting close to dinner time, although it's only 4:00, so I guess that's the time change for you. But according to recent research, that if you have parents, it shows that parents who insist or kind of shove down their kids' throats their political views, that they inadvertently influence their children to abandon those beliefs once they become adults. And so that sometimes if you push your kid too hard to believe very, very conservative or very, very liberal, and you really are insistent upon that, that can actually lead to your kids rebelling from that. And the reason that the research showed that happened is because that when you grow up in a household where children are sort of encouraged strongly to adopt the political views of their family, of their parents, that means you're talking politics all the time. And what happens is that when those kids leave the house, go on to college or high school, that they're really used to talking about politics all the time. And when you're used to talking about politics, then you are introduced to other viewpoints. And it's that introduction to other viewpoints that actually gets that child, now young adult, to reconsider the viewpoint that was insisted upon them. So it's pretty interesting. And think about if that kind of corresponds with your experience growing up. Did your parents sort of insist that you embrace a particular ideology or a particular party affiliation? This graph shows you, or I guess it's a chart, shows you the impact that the way that your family can politically socialize you as it relates to political efficacy. And so remember that political efficacy is the sense that your voice makes a difference, right? That if you vote, you can make change, that the government like listens to you, right? And cares about what your concerns are, and that you can basically make a difference. And so on the side here, and let me put my magic pen on here, it says, so this is based on polling, and it says of those who grew up with political discussions in the home, 75% are more likely to be registered to vote. 71% are more like or have higher trust in government, and 68% say that voting is more important. And so here, it basically says in the dark green or the solid green, and so that would be that this is the responses from young adults who grew up in a household that talked a lot about politics. Okay, this is their responses on this side. And the stripy is those are the young adults who grew up in households where you didn't talk about politics, where it wasn't a subject of conversation. And so if you grow up in a household where you talk about politics, you're more likely to be registered to vote. You're more likely to trust government. You're more likely to believe voting is important, political efficacy, and that you believe that politicians pay attention to your concerns. Those who grow up in a household that don't talk about politics, they have a lower level of political efficacy. And maybe ask yourself why you think that is, right? It seems like if you talked about politics, maybe you would be like, oh, I can't trust government and they're all crooked or they don't listen to you. But it seems like the more you know about politics and the more you talk about politics, you understand how complicated it is to pass bills into law. You understand sort of that lawmakers are not these one-dimensional individuals, that they're complex humans just like all other humans. And so you might have a more robust and complete understanding of politics, which most likely results in a higher level of political efficacy. When you don't know a lot about something, it's easier to feel negative about it. Like, I don't know much about politics, not an interest to me. Probably, my voice isn't going to make a difference. So it's sort of interesting to look at the impact that families and talking about politics around the dining room table can have on your sense of political efficacy. Okay, the next agent of political socialization that we're going to talk about is social networks. And when we talk about social networks, we're not talking about a person's informal friend group or group of peers, but we're really talking about social media networks like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, whatever social media network, you can sort of think of. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about that they serve as an agent of political socialization. Now, your textbook talks about that research shows that political opinions are shaped by social networks. They referenced the work that was done by Betsy Sinclair in 2012. And that, research shows that social networks have the power to change an individual's opinion. And the way that they think that it works is that that when members of a social network express a particular political opinion or belief, you see that in your social network, and that you might reconsider your own perspective, particularly if your own perspective or your own beliefs are outside of the norm of the other folks on your in your social media network. And so that you might change your beliefs in order to conform to what you see in social media networks. And so research does indicate that it can, have this sort of power. Also, social media networks can also introduce you to an issue that you might not know anything about. And so, in fact, it's easier to have, like it's harder to change somebody's opinion on an issue, although it looks like media networks have the capacity to do that. But when you don't know anything about a subject, then it's easier for you to get to know and to embrace a particular opinion when you're sort of starting from a blank slate. So maybe ask yourself, do you think that have social networks shaped your political beliefs and values? And also, is the political socialization of social networks, is that beneficial to democracy, detrimental to democracy, both? There's been a lot of attention recently placed on Facebook and the promotion of misinformation on Facebook. They talk about in your textbook that when misinformation is posted on Facebook, it is much more likely for that misinformation to spread quickly throughout the social media network than true stories, right? And so we're going to be reading a cool article, not this week, but not next week, about the dark psychology of social networks and how social media networks seem to feed the outrage machine, which then sort of like increases and entrenches political polarization in the United States. And they also touch on the dangers, obvious dangers of the spread of misinformation as it relates to social networks. So something to think about in terms of could be positive because you could be introduced to issues that you don't know about on social media, but it could also be negative because it fuels outrage. Social media sort of does that. And also that it can be a conduit for the rapid spread of misinformation. The final agent of political socialization that we're going to take a look at in the lecture is social groups. And so membership in social groups shape our political values. That you are a member of a social group. Some social groups you choose, some social groups you don't really choose. And so you don't choose what race you are, but you are a member, of a social group that shares your race or ethnicity. You can choose your gender, but once you choose your gender, then that becomes your gender identity. And then you kind of are a part of a social group that shares that same gender identity. Religion, most of us, don't choose our religion if we're raised in a particular custom, but I mean, clearly, as you're an adult, you can change your religion. So all of those are examples of membership in social groups. And the thinking here is that if people of like similar backgrounds, if people that have the same race, same gender, same ethnicity, same religion, that people that have those same backgrounds tend to have similar life experiences. And we talked about this when we were talking about sociological representation. So, you're a member of a social group. It's likely that you're going to share similar life experiences of those in your social group. And then what happens is that it is possible that those experiences shape our understanding of the political world. And in fact, that's borne out by political opinion. When you look at the difference between a political opinion or public opinion between blacks and whites or men and women, we're going to take a look at these in a moment, we see that there's some pretty significant differences in the attitudes that people have depending upon their social group. Okay, so on the last slide we were talking about how people in different social groups that has a socializing effect on you, right? And so that a woman's lived experience is probably different than a man's lived experience, and that lived experience can result in having different opinions about political subjects and also having different values as well. And so, on this slide, we're going to be taking a look at what's known as the gender gap. That is the difference in opinion between men and women. And for those of you in my sex, power, and public policy class, I know there's some overlap there. This slide will look familiar to you because we looked at this when we were examining the gender gap in a public opinion in our class earlier this semester. So this information comes from the American National Election Studies, the ANES. And every presidential election, the University of Michigan does this comprehensive public opinion survey of voters in the last one being in 2020. And so these are just some of the questions that show a pretty significant difference in opinion between men and women. So again, kind of indicating that membership in social groups has an impact on what your political opinions and values are. And so this question is, the federal government should make it more difficult to buy guns. Here, let me put the magic red pen on so we can sort of see that. 55% of women say, yes, the federal government should make it more difficult. A lot less for men, 43%. And so you have this gender gap of 12%. Favors requiring employees to offer paid leave to parents of new children. Pretty strong support for that across the board, but still more women are likely to support that public policy issue than men. Favors allowing transgender people to serve in the United States Armed Forces. Pretty significant gender gap of 7.8%. Women more likely to support that. Support for gay and lesbian couples being allowed to legally married. Across the board, very strong support for same-sex marriage in the United States at this point. Still have a little bit of a gender gap, but still mid to high 60s for each. and that a gender gap of 8.5 points here when it comes to federal spending on aid to the poor should be increased. Women are more likely to say increase that spending on aid to the poor, men less likely to support that. Okay. And so this, sort of shows that, it's possible due to the lived experiences of men and women that their attitudes about these issues could be shaped by their membership in that social group. All right, so this graph is straight from your textbook, and it shows the difference in public opinion on political issues as it relates to race. And so the green line is those who responded to the survey who are white, and the orange line is the Black respondents from the survey. And I'll let you take a look at this in your textbook, but the first one is this is the percentage of people who thought that Blacks should get by without special favor, just like Irish, Italians, and Jews did as they were coming to the United States. And, more white respondents, significantly, almost 30 percentage points more white respondents say that Blacks should get by without special treatment. The question, think slavery and discrimination have created conditions that make it difficult for Blacks to work their way out of the lower class. African Americans are much more likely to say that slavery and discrimination have made it difficult to get out of a lower class. Support of affirmative action. We talked about this on the last slide. In the last lecture, look at the difference there. Almost a 60%, or probably more, about a 50-point difference between white and Black respondents, and a gap too in terms of support, racial support for Black Lives Matters. And so again, this kind of is an indication of that, since public opinion is a reflection of your attitudes and your values, then that the values and attitudes of white and Black Americans are maybe shaped by their membership in a particular social group, racial social group in this instance. So the differences in opinion in social groups can have pretty significant political implications beyond just the differences in beliefs, beyond the differences in public opinion. Opinion oftentimes corresponds with party affiliation. Values oftentimes correspond with party affiliations. And so when you look at that gender gap between men and women more likely to support gun control, women more likely to support social spending on aid to the needy, that's going to be reflected in party affiliation. Women are much more likely to be Democrats, or not much more. Women are more likely to be Democrats than men. Men are more likely to be Republicans. And that is, that party affiliation is a reflection of those values. Government should aid those in need. Government shouldn't interfere with a person's right to bear arms. It gets played out in party affiliation. As we see that difference in terms of the attitudes between whites and Black Americans, Democrats are more likely to support affirmative action. Democrats are more likely to see Black Lives Matter as a positive influence on our society. Blacks there have strong support for Black Lives Matter, therefore they're more likely to be Democrats. Whites are more likely to be Republicans, okay? And so that those values have implications in terms of party affiliation as well. Okay, that's it for this lecture, and I just want to remind you about your extra credit writing opportunity. Pick 2 agents of political socialization and describe specifically how these agents shaped your political beliefs and values. Submit by the due date for a total to earn up to 10 extra credit points. Thanks for your attention and time. I appreciate it, and I'll talk to you again soon.